Hey everybody, David R. Becker here with BeckerArt, and in today's newsletter, I want to talk to you a little bit about white watercolor and white gouache, and which one I feel is the best. I've taken four of these, as you can see. I've taken four different whites that Holbein makes. Three of them are gouache, which is opaque watercolor, and titanium white, which is a watercolor that Holbein makes. And I didn't add Chinese white to this mix because I know Chinese white is a transparent white, and I'm looking for a white that will cover the best, like that will cover, especially when I'm using my black Legion black paper, watercolor paper. I tend to think that some of them should be more pigmented, so I'm trying to figure out which one is the best. And so I've taken four of them, and three, like I said, three of them are gouache, and one is watercolor. And let me just go through them. So this first one is titanium white watercolor. It's not a gouache, it's a watercolor. And what I did is I took the tube and put a dab on each one of these whites up here, and then I wet a circle, and I just want to see how it ran, how it felt like it runs, because the finer the pigment is, probably the more it's going to run. And I found that titanium ran a real lot. Felt really finely ground, very, very finely ground. Where the zinc, this next one is zinc, and then we have primary white, which is a gouache, and permanent white, which is a gouache also. And so the zinc white, when I did this circle of a puddle of water, it went in, but it seemed very transparent. It seemed a little bit more transparent than the titanium. Primary white was also it was good, but not quite as covering and not quite as pigmented, I don't think, as a titanium white. And permanent violet was very, or permanent violet, permanent white was very close to titanium. Those two seemed pretty close to the same. Felt really like they ran about the same. And then what I did down here is I took them and then just did it on dry paper, where I just wanted to see how it felt. Like I took a big wad of the paint and just brushed it and see how much it would cover the black paper. And again, I'm using black paper only because that shows me the density of the pigment, and I could see, how well it covers black surface. I would have done it on white, but then you don't see, unless there's a watercolor underneath it of a color, to see how it covers. And so that was titanium, and it covered really well. I mean, it covered really well. It again seemed like it was very finely pigmented, like the pigment was really finely ground. Zinc white seemed again a little bit more transparent. It didn't seem quite as covering, didn't cover as well. Primary white was the thickest out of the tube. It seemed very, very thick. And these other three, zinc, titanium, and permanent, were a little bit more creamy, where this one was more like butter. When it came out of the tube, it was really, really thick and didn't have that like the feel of more like a cream, like it came out as cream wise. But it did cover okay. It covered okay. Not as much as the titanium. And then the permanent was pretty good too. The permanent, again, permanent felt a lot like the titanium. Those two felt a lot alike. Though down here, what I did is I just took a wad of paint. I just took a big gloop of paint and I put it on my brush and I made a circle where the brush was pretty wet, but I also took a lot of pigment and I just made a puddle and I let the pigment float, and I wanted to see how well it would cover. And again, titanium covered really, really well. Then we had the zinc, and the zinc again was not great. It was a little bit more transparent. It felt, I would have said that it felt a little bit like a Chinese white, but I don't have Chinese white on here to show you. The Chinese white is a little bit more transparent. It's made to be transparent. And so that felt a little bit more like zinc. Zinc felt a little bit like a transparent medium. Primary also didn't cover well. It was okay. It was thick, but it just didn't seem, it seemed more transparent, and it's not as much pigment. This pigment seemed a little bit thicker, and I'm not sure if that makes sense. It's like it was not ground as fine. Permanent again it felt good, but again it didn't cover as well as the titanium. So out of all these on this test, the one that I felt was the best when it comes to covering up and a wash. It was the titanium. It just felt very, very pigmented, and it felt like it was really covering the black really well. Like I couldn't, I used this, I tried to use it about the same amount, but when you're doing it, you could feel some of the thickness also. And so I felt like titanium was the most workable. And this also, what I did is while this was wet, while these circles were wet, I put a big dab of that pigment just across it, a big amount of pigment, and I just put it into a wet wash to get a soft edge. And again, I think the titanium really covers up well. Here, the zinc was okay. It didn't cover up as well, but again, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but it does, it's a little bit more transparent than the titanium. Here, the primary white, because it was so thick and I just gobbed it on there because it was kind of like butter instead of cream, it covered really well, but I just because I put a lot on and because it was really, like I said, it was more thicker. It was thicker. And then permanent was also just like the titanium again, very close, but in the big end, when I wet it, it just seemed a little bit more transparent than the titanium. So then what I did is I took and I wanted to mix some color with them. So then what I did here is I took Scarlet Lake red, and I just mixed it to get a pink. And I wanted to see how well the pink then covers up the black also, and how well they mix together. Because some pigments don't mix so well together. That's like they don't combine or something. But so I went with the titanium. This is the titanium, the first one again. And then again, that one covered really well again. And it mixed fine. It mixed super fine, and they just mixed together. Zinc was a little bit of a problem. It wasn't combining together as well. Again, maybe it's because it's transparent, but it didn't mix together as well as the titanium. And because it always was that right afterwards. And then you can see it was a little bit more, again, more transparent. It was a little bit more transparent. And so if you want to use some white that's a little bit more transparent, that doesn't let you see through the color, then you'd use maybe a zinc white. And so in mixing the color together, it wasn't creamy enough to like let itself mix together. It was kind of strange because the titanium mixed really well together. It just like combined instantly. And then what I did is I went over here to, that was the primary, and primary white. It seemed fine, but again, because it was thick, it was a little bit more thick like butter instead of cream. It was a little bit harder to mix the red because it was thicker. It was a different consistency of like the body of the paint. Not big deal though. It wasn't that big a deal. Then I did the last one, which was permanent white. And again, that one felt good. Actually, this one felt the best of when it came to mixing the colors together. Or no. Actually, you know what? It was the primary white that mixed really well because it was buttery, and you could just rub it right into the red, and so that really worked out well together. So they mixed together well, and actually, when I mixed it together with them, then it covered better. Like it covered better when I mixed it with the red, and so that was a great one when it comes to mixing. So yeah, I misplaced those two because this one was the one that didn't mix so well together. They just I'm not sure why. It made it more transparent, and it wasn't mixing together well. Like it was a different body. That was so I'm switching those two to apart. But it didn't, and again, it didn't cover as well. But you know, it all depends on how much pigment you put in your brush. And I tried to put it evenly, but you know that's hard to do. But I felt that of all the tests that I had done with all these whites, is that the titanium definitely was the one that covered the best. Like it was very finely ground. I could tell it was just covered up really well. And this is a watercolor and not a gouache. Gouache is an opaque watercolor, right? Gouache is opaque watercolor, which you're thinking is more opaque. But I felt that the watercolor titanium white was a little bit, and it's called titanium opaque white, titanium white opaque white. So it's an opaque white, but is very, very opaque. And I think it's ground more or something than the other gouaches. The gouache is still covered. I mean, you can tell they're covered. And then what I did is I took some of that, again, thickness, and I went right through the middle while it was wet. I took a big gob of it and just put it through it. And all of them worked about the same. They were all about the same. The zinc, though, was the only one that was always constantly giving me more transparency. So these three are pretty much very pretty close, very, very close. And if I were to, like, if I was in a bind and I needed a white, any one of these would work great. You know, these three for covering, zinc's not so much, but you could just add more white. But it just felt like the titanium was the thickest or the most cover. It gave the most coverage to that. And so that was just my idea. Just wanted to see because I use white now in my watercolors, and I do that not to cover up mistakes. It's to enhance. Sometimes when I'm doing like a sky and I need some soft edged clouds, and I want to take and put some white over top of the blue, you know, and just let it have those little fingers and stuff. And so that covers up the best I've felt so far. And I've always used titanium, and I'm going to keep on using titanium because just felt like it was the most coverage and the most finely ground pigment. And when it comes to finely ground pigment, that really helps the coverage, I think, because if it's a little bit not quite as pigmented, I guess you could say, then you're going to get a little bit more transparency or of the white. And so I know it's not a traditional way of using white in transparent watercolor, but there's times when I feel that I have to mix a color to get like a pink, and I want a pink color. So then that's the reason I want to see also how they mix with them. And actually, titanium mixed really well with the white, with the red, and it just worked out perfectly. And so I would say, you know, if you feel like you really want to have coverage, then use titanium. And it's watercolor, and it's not gouache, because gouache has a different binder, I think, in it. And it's also finely ground, but for some reason that titanium white, it acted a lot, like I said, it acted a lot like the permanent white, like this one. I'm not sure if that's pretty close to it, but and another thing is that I think the titanium white is like Holbein's watercolor, which it doesn't dry to a hard clump. And where I'm not sure about the gouache because I've never tested that, but I'm sure some of their other gouaches will harden more than like the watercolor will because they don't rejuvenate as well if you let them dry really hard, like the watercolors that Holbein has, because Holbein's watercolor doesn't have oxgall in it, and so they don't dry to a hard clump. And so I don't think the titanium white has any oxgall in it because that also stays pretty fresh. And so that's it. So I would say if you have any questions about this, in the description, ask me about these whites and stuff. And like, there's not that much of a difference. It's not like super big difference in this stuff. So any one of these will work if you're using it to just enhance your painting and mixing with white to get a different color. Like to get a pink, you have to mix white with red, right? So you don't have to go buy a tube of red or a pink, or you don't have to buy a tube of lilac or lavender. You can just mix a dark purple with a white and you can get a lavender. And so it's a great, I'd say take the titanium white for mixing. It just worked out really well. Also, this one also worked out pretty well too. The primary white, that felt like it was mixed really well. I think it's because of how thick it was. It was, like I said, it was a little bit thicker than the other paints, meaning like whatever I had in it was just a little bit thicker, not as creamy. This was creamy, but also very thick with a lot of pigment. It just felt like it was really covering well. All right, so that's my take on the Holbein watercolor and gouache whites. And like I said, if you have any more questions about it, put it in the description of my video. And please subscribe. And I try to put out one of these a week, something to help you out in your watercolor endeavors. And so come back and every week and subscribe to my YouTube channel. All right, until next time, we'll see you then. Bye-bye.